Hello and welcome to another diary reading here on my channel. If you're new to these, I have been buying old diaries off of eBay for about the past 2 years and have been reading them on YouTube and doing research on who wrote them and eventually trying to reunite them with living members of their family. We've had 2 success stories so far. I post the first reading from a diary here publicly, and then the rest of them go on my Buy Me a Coffee website, which you will find a link to down below in the description. It's a subscription thing to help me fund the buying of the diaries and hopefully be able to return them to people without asking too much of them, because sometimes they can get a little expensive and I just don't want to make it impossible to return them. But I can't personally afford to buy thousands of dollars of diaries just to give away. Wish I could, but I can't. So that's how this works. And today's diary is one written in 1911 by a Mary Elizabeth Robinson, but she married Ebenezer Sanborn in 1850. When she wrote this diary, she was 80 years old. She was born in 1831 in Boston, Massachusetts, and she continued to live in the area. Let's see a little about her here. She had a couple siblings. Only 2 of them, I think, were alive at this point. Charlotte and I don't know who else, but it seems that she had 4 sisters and a brother. She had 8 children, apparently, with Ebenezer, but possibly only 3 were alive at this point. Ebenezer, Mary, Millie, Elizabeth, and Frederick. Her son Henry might have been alive. I'm not really sure. What else? We do actually have one photo of Mary Elizabeth. Maybe I'll just call her Mary from now on. When she was younger, again, like I said, she wrote this when she was about 80 in 1911, but we do have this photo of her as a young lady and also a picture of her husband Ebenezer. There are a couple photos of some of her children and grandchildren as well. We'll pop those up as they are mentioned. I apologize for any noises. The cats are running in and out and they're wearing bells too, so I'm gonna cut as much of that out as possible if they get rowdy, but they're around. And there's a refrigerator and a clock and who knows what else, so I apologize. Also, I'd like to mention this outfit. I try to dress in the style of the period. I got it from a really cool company in the Ukraine called Gibson Girl, and I'll put a link in the description to their Instagram and store and whatnot. Bye, Petey. So you can check out what they have. I have a couple of their skirts and blouses, and this is a whole outfit here, and I don't have too many pictures of them yet, but we're getting there. This one I have not photographed yet. This is the first time on camera with it, and I attempted to do my hair, but I am also not very good with that, and I need to kind of create some hair pieces for myself, because this is it's hard to do. Especially with bangs. That was not a thing back then, from what I gather. There were a couple styles with little bangs, but yeah. And now, without further ado, we will begin reading from Mary Elizabeth's diary. I'm actually going to start in the back because she wrote a memoir, a little about her younger life in the back. So I thought we could start with that instead, and then move through 1911. All right, here we go. So her handwriting is a little difficult to read, but it's not too bad. So we're reading directly from the diary, and I didn't type anything out, well, except my notes. So here we go. Forgive me if I get stuck on anything. My memory takes me back to 1834. I was born in 1831. The first home I can remember was on Center Street, Boston, though I was not born there. It was a fine house and was probably built for a wealthy family, as that part of the city before was settled by many wealthy men. whose names can be found in the History of Old Boston. The winter after I was 3 years old, in April 23rd, 1834, I remember sitting in one of the deep-seated windows and looking at the stars, which were very brilliant, and wondering about them, as most children do. I remember our neighbors across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Gay, maybe, and their son and daughter, George and Annie, and many other incidents. We moved the next April, when I was 4 years old, to number 21 Ann Street, now called North Street. Sister Charlotte, a girl of 16, carried Emma, then 18 months old, and led me by the hand, as it was not very far from our old home. Sister Charlotte was married in June 1837, the year I was 6 years old, in April. She was only 18 years old. I remember her wedding distinctly. Her husband, Mr. Pittman. Her husband, Mr. Pittman, brother Augustus, was groomsman, and Sarah Pittman was bridesmaid. Her dress, I'm not sure, refreshments, and most of the company present. Charlotte Jr. was born April 5th, 1838. When she was 6 weeks old, we drove to Petersham to Aunt Maria's wedding, June 1838. My father and mother, sister Charlotte and husband, and baby sister Emma, 4 years old, and myself. Sister Charlotte was taken very ill, and we were obliged to leave her there for several weeks. Aunt Maria and her husband moved to Boston and lived on Union Street, where I remember visiting them, and that we had roast beef and bird's nest pudding for dinner, and how Mr. Reed, Aunt's husband, spoilt all of my dinner by covering it with tomato ketchup. April 1839. Father bought Grandfather Chamberlain's farm, and we moved there the same month. Grandfather and grandmother took the covered buggy and the old gray mare and drove out to New York State, way out west, as we used to call it, to visit their son Elisha. It's not Elijah, is it? It's Elisha. They returned the latter part of the summer. Aunt Maria's health began to fail, and she made us a long visit that summer, but seemed to get no better. She was very fond of tomatoes, and Father raised some that summer expressly for her. They had been raised but a short time in our country. Aunt went back to the city. Her health, something very rapidly, like declined, I think, but it's a different word that I can't make out. They broke up housekeeping and boarded with Augustus and planned to go to South Carolina to Uncle Eben's, maybe? Her trunks were all packed, everything was ready, but she died very suddenly. Grandmother started for Boston as soon as she knew that Maria was worse, but she died before grandmother got there. It's sad. I think she was brought to Petersham to be buried. Grandfather died that winter. Aunt Anne came to us from Uncle Eben's, and I don't know whether before or after grandfather's death, Aunt Maria died November 29th, 1839. Grandfather died in the winter of 1840. When Jefferson was a candidate for president, grandfather was the only voter in Petersham to vote for him. Grandfather's name was Peter Chamberlain. Grandmother's name was Charlotte. Her maiden name was Hammond. Aunt can't read that. Hammond of South Carolina. When grandmother married, I'm not sure what that last sentence is. Peter Chamberlain, her father. Mr. Hammond gave her 2 slaves, Sam and Phyllis. They lived with grandmother a long time. Sister Lydia, who is 5 years older than I, remembers them distinctly. So Lydia must be still alive. I didn't write down which ones were alive. I know she mentioned Charlotte, so Charlotte and Lydia. Lydia's 85. I don't know what became of them. They probably died at grandmother's. Massachusetts was a slave state in my great-grandfather Hammond's time, and he owned a good many. There's a name I can't read. Governor? Can't be. I don't know. Hammond of South Carolina was his grandson. Grandfather Chamberlain took a half-witted boy from the poorhouse to help on the farm. He lived with us a number of years and then died of an abscess in the throat. His name was James Bragg, but went by the name of Jim. His brothers, more foolish than Jim, came to his funeral. They said they wished more of the family would die so they could have another good dinner. At a lecture, a blindfolded... oh, geez, I can't read that. Did I write down what that... I don't think I did. Phrenologist examined Jim's head and told him he was a fool. Jim thanked him so gentlemanly that the man was much afraid he had made a mistake. He had also told him he could not make a spigot to a cider bushel. Right? Bushel? Bustle? Is a bustle a thing? It looks like Bussell, and I don't think I looked that up. Jim was very indignant and left the hall saying he would show them what he could do. When we got home, we found him in the kitchen trying to whittle a stick into a spigot, but he couldn't do it. Grandfather Chamberlain had 2 brothers, Samuel and Levi, I think. Samuel's daughter married Jesse Rogers. His son was Joshua, father of something. Levi's son was Joel, father of Avery. The first school I attended was in Boston in 1835, a very small building of 1 story at the lower end of Parkman Place, leading off of Hanover Street. The teacher was a Miss Chandler, a lame woman. She wore curls hanging from her forehead. I went there 4 years. It was a primary school. I was a rather dull scholar, but always stood high in reading and spelling. The only punishment I can remember that one teacher ever inflicted was to tie our aprons over our faces. I shall always remember the smothered sensation, for I was naughty to something. My father used to take us very often in pleasant weather on Sundays to Boston Common. There was no public garden then, nothing but water, called the Back Bay. So, actually, I did look up the Back Bay. It was built on reclaimed land in the Charles River Basin, begun in 1859. So she was remembering before that, and fully built by around 1900. It's most famous for its rows of Victorian brownstone homes, considered one of the best preserved examples of 19th century urban design in the U.S. So she remembers before these rows of Victorian brownstone homes were even built. So pretty neat. Hard to read here. We were something little sisters. He was always so kind and thoughtful to us. When we got back, he would undress us and put us to bed to rest from our long walk for a few hours. I always enjoyed going to the common to see the dogs swimming in the muck, Frog Pond. When I was about 3 years, I strayed from home. The family becoming anxious, they notified the crier, who went around ringing his bell, crying, "Child lost, child lost." And at last father found me, sitting in the crier's lap, very happy and contented. In those days we had no bulletin that everyone who ran could read. So the crier would go round ringing his bell and calling out everything important, I think. The streets were lighted with whale oil lamps, and my sisters were always on the watch at night to see the lamplighter with his ladder to climb the lamp post and his blazing torch to light the lanterns, I believe. I do not remember what was used for lighting the city lamps after the whale oil, before using gas, but families used burning fluid and camphine. It was quite an event when the city was first lighted by gas. We missed the lamp lighter so much. It was about this time a Miss Cummings wrote the novel called The Lamplighter. And I did look that up. The Lamplighter, written in 1854, tells the story of Gertrude Flint, an abandoned and mistreated orphan rescued at the age of 8 by Truman Flint, a lamplighter, from her abusive guardian, Nan Grant. Gertrude is lovingly raised and taught virtues and religious faith. She becomes a moralistic woman. In adulthood, she is rewarded for her long suffering with marriage to a childhood friend. And it was a bestseller. So, she remembers that book. My grandmother still used candles of home manufacture. After moving to the farm, I remember seeing my mother make some candles. She had about a dozen tin molds hung on a frame, and she filled them with hot beef tallow. But we never used candles very much. The smoke from them was very disagreeable. We used a small implement, I think called snuffery, to put out the light and prevent them smoking. The odor of whale oil was also very offensive. Burning fluid and camphine give a much better light something than oil with no offensive odor, but very explosive. We had no can't read that. I had no something then. Our working days were 11 hours long, from 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening, with 1 hour at noon for dinner. Many stores were open until 9 in the evening. No one thought of complaining. Everyone seemed contented and happy. Of course, there were exceptions, but this was the general rule. The time I am writing of, we had no steam cars, no telegraph, no telephone, no phonograph, no something or aeroplanes. Steam was just coming into use and electricity was only dreamed of. Before we moved to Petersham, we visited there every summer, but always rode in the stagecoach. A distance of 60 miles, we would start at 4 a.m., arriving at Grandpa's at 6 p.m., very tired but very happy little children. The year we moved to Petersham in 1839 was our first experience of traveling in steam cars. We rode as far as Worcester, 40 miles, then 20 miles by stagecoach with 4 horses, and I think we enjoyed the stagecoach the most. Once when Sister Charlotte was quite young, she went to Petersham alone. Something was said about her travel. "Oh, that is safe," she said. "I have the key on my neck." I remember my father taking me, when about 5 years old, to the Boston Common to see some wild Indians. They were dressed as warriors in their paint and feathers. They were very fierce looking, and Father held me up to see them. I was very much afraid of them then, and still have a sense of fear of them now. At the time, we were having a great deal of trouble with the Indians, especially in the western states. Our function of that day was mostly about Indians and their cruelty to the whites, which was one cause of my great fear of them. When I was about 11 years old, Father took me to see some native Arabs, which was also very interesting. He also took me to see the burning of Moscow. I remember nothing about the show, except the burning of the city and the people running around with great bundles on their shoulders. I forgot to look this up. The burning of Moscow. I just can't catch everything. When I was 14, I went with Sister C and her husband to see Edwin something Jr. when he was a young man in The Gladiator. Oh my goodness. Handwriting. Yeah, you try. 1848. Jeez. Years after I saw him in Lady Macbeth, I went with George about 1880. I also saw his father in Richard III. Boston Common was as large as it now is, but not near as many trees, and no fountain in the pond, and no statues. These were there were some seals, but not many, and on the board malls, there were no signs up, "Keep off the grass." We children had all of the common for a playground. One part of it was given up to beating carpets, and I have made many balls of yarn from the ravelings that came from the carpets. When I was 11, my corset's a little, Can I sit back okay? Just check it, oh, whatever. I have my monitor here. When I was 11, Sister Emma and Lizzie somebody and I made some wreaths out of white clover. When going home, some boys on the corner of Hanover Street said, "Oh, what pretty flowers, what pretty wreaths, and what darned pretty girls made them." This was before the city was supplied with something water. I do not know how the frog pond was filled before then. The public garden was very small at that time. The water of the back bay came up to the pond and was kept back by a breakwater. The city was beginning to fill in the back bay at this time, 1848, and all of this part of the city, called Back Bay, was then all water. The State House was very small, comparatively, but we were very proud of it and always took our friends from the country to visit it. With some friends one day, we were sitting on Beacon Mall when a fruit woman sent by some young men something seat nearby offered us some fruit to be paid for by these young men, we being either too innocent or too shy, refused, and soon got up and walked away. So even in those primitive days, one needed to be very circumspect. In those days, everybody far and wide, I'm not sure, went to the Common 4th of July night to see the fireworks, for no one ever thought to have them on their own grounds, and the city would be crowded with strangers. The Common would be packed, and when a rocket went off as a set piece, you could see a great something of upturned white faces and hear a sound of many waters composed of oohs, ohs, and ahs. I, being so very small and short, would have to be held up to see the something. To some of my escorts it might have been agreeable, but to others I am afraid I seemed a little heavy. The year I was married, 1850, the part of the city of Boston called South End and Back Bay was covered with water up to the pond in the public garden, and was kept back from overflowing the garden by a breakwater. The city commenced about that time to fill it in with dirt brought in by cars on a track I think was laid especially for them. A great deal of the refuse of the city was also used, and many thought it was very unwholesome, but I do not think it proved so. But it took some time for the ground to become solid enough for heavy buildings. And that's all she wrote. I wonder if she meant to write more. She left a couple more pages there to write on. But that is a little backstory on Mary, and we'll just stop there. And the next reading, we will begin reading about her life in 1911. Those readings will start back over on the Buy Me a Coffee site, so the link is below if you're interested in, following along with Mary. That's about it, I think. So as much as I love this outfit, I'm going to get out of this corset and into something a little more cozy for the day. This overcast day in the Netherlands. Make myself a nice hot coffee. Start editing. And I will see you later. Hopefully you'll join me over on Buy Me a Coffee if you're interested in more of these diary readings. If not, no big deal. I'm around. And I'll see you later. Bye.